He laughed at her tears, until she stepped out of a limousine with the man he feared most. The night was supposed to be one of joy for Emily Carter. At 27, she had just discovered she was 3 months pregnant, a miracle she had prayed for after 2 years of marriage. She thought this news would finally bring her and her husband Daniel closer. Instead, it became the beginning of her greatest heartbreak. Emily had imagined telling Daniel in a sweet, intimate way, maybe over dinner, with a small gift box carrying the ultrasound photo inside. She rehearsed the words in front of the mirror, her hands resting gently on her belly, whispering, "You're going to be a dad." She hoped he would hold her, maybe cry with happiness. But life doesn't always follow the script we prepare. That evening, Emily waited at their apartment. The table was set with candles, and her cooking still steamed on the plates. She wore a simple dress, the one Daniel once said made her look radiant. Hours passed. Her phone buzzed, but it wasn't Daniel. It was her friend, sending a photo from a downtown bar. Daniel, his arms wrapped tightly around another woman, kissing her as though Emily never existed. Her heart cracked in silence. She pressed her hand against her stomach, as if protecting the tiny life inside from the shock tearing through her chest. The food went cold. The candles burned out. Daniel never came home that night. The next morning, Daniel returned casually, smelling of perfume that wasn't Emily's. She confronted him, tears streaming down her face. Instead of guilt, he sneered. "You're too soft, Emily. Too ordinary. I need more than a schoolteacher with nothing to offer." The words stabbed deeper than any betrayal. She was carrying his child, yet he spoke as if she were a burden he couldn't wait to discard. From that day forward, Daniel became a stranger under the same roof. He ignored her, flaunted his affair, and eventually packed a suitcase without even looking back. Emily was left alone, 3 months pregnant, rejected at her most vulnerable moment. Nights became endless sobbing into a pillow, trying not to shake too much so the baby would be safe. But fate has a way of stepping in when we least expect it. One rainy afternoon, as Emily rushed to a doctor's appointment after fainting at home, she stumbled outside the clinic. A man in a tailored suit stopped to help her, shielding her from the rain with his umbrella. His voice was calm, commanding yet kind. "Are you all right? You shouldn't be out here alone." That man was Michael Anderson, a billionaire real estate tycoon, someone Emily had only read about in the news. She never imagined he would become the person who would change her life forever. And while Daniel believed Emily would disappear into shame, he had no idea she was about to rise stronger than ever. Because the next time Emily faced him, she would not arrive broken and alone. She would step out of a limousine with the one man Daniel could never defeat. Emily Carter was not the kind of woman who stood out in a crowd. She didn't wear expensive clothes, she didn't chase glamorous lifestyles, and she didn't seek attention. At 27, she lived a simple life, working as a second-grade teacher in Los Angeles. Her world revolved around her students, their innocent laughter, and the hope that she could make a small difference in their futures. She had a heart full of love and a quiet strength that often went unnoticed. Her colleagues admired her patience. Children adored her because she treated each of them like they mattered. Emily believed in kindness and sacrifice, qualities she thought her husband Daniel once cherished. They met in college, when Daniel was charming, ambitious, and full of dreams. Emily was drawn to his confidence, the way he promised her the world. She thought they were building something real, something lasting. Life with Daniel started like a fairy tale. He took her on dates to rooftop restaurants, sent flowers to her classroom, and whispered that she was the only woman he could ever love. Emily believed him with all her heart. She gave up better opportunities, even turned down a teaching position abroad, just to stay by his side. She imagined their future together. A home full of warmth, children playing in the yard, Daniel proudly holding her hand as they faced life as a team. But as years passed, Emily noticed small cracks. Daniel grew restless, often staying out late, dismissing her questions with excuses about work. He criticized her modest salary, mocking the fact that she didn't contribute much compared to his growing income. Still, Emily endured, hoping love would be enough to keep them together. When she discovered she was pregnant, she thought it was the blessing that would heal their distance. She imagined Daniel's face lighting up, his arms wrapping around her protectively. Instead, his coldness only deepened. Despite the betrayal, Emily was not a weak woman. Every morning, she still woke up early, went to school, and greeted her students with a smile, even when her heart was breaking. She carried her pain in silence, determined not to let it poison the life growing inside her. She told herself, "I will be strong for my baby." That inner promise became her lifeline when Daniel finally abandoned her completely. Emily's strength came not from wealth or power, but from her capacity to love. Yet in a world that often values money and status above character, she was easily underestimated. Daniel believed leaving her would destroy her spirit forever. He saw her as fragile, someone who could never stand on her own. What he never realized was that Emily's quiet resilience was her greatest weapon. And soon, that resilience would carry her into the arms of someone powerful enough to rewrite her destiny. Because Emily's life was about to collide with Michael Anderson, the billionaire whose arrival would change everything Daniel thought he controlled. New York City glowed like a jewel in winter, its skyline sparkling under the cold night air. To outsiders, it was a city of dreams, where fortunes were made and reputations were broken. For Daniel Carter, it was a stage where he desperately wanted to shine. He was no longer satisfied with being just another employee in a corporate office. He wanted power, recognition, and the glittering lifestyle that came with it. Daniel worked for Anderson Global, one of the largest real estate empires in America, led by the elusive billionaire Michael Anderson. The company's name opened doors, and Daniel used that prestige to climb social circles he once only dreamed of. He loved attending rooftop parties, sipping champagne beside influential investors, and showing off his expensive suits. But behind the tailored jackets and charming smiles, Daniel was nothing more than a middle manager, a man struggling to prove he belonged among the elite. His hunger for status consumed him. He started judging everything through the lens of appearances. To him, Emily was no longer the supportive wife he once adored. She became an anchor holding him back. While she spent her days in a classroom teaching children how to spell, he believed he deserved a partner who matched the glamorous image he tried to project. The truth was, Daniel didn't want love anymore. He wanted a trophy. It was in this glittering world of polished marble floors, gala dinners, and hushed business deals that Daniel decided to erase Emily from his life. He replaced her with a woman who mirrored the shallow ideals he chased. High heels, designer bags, a loud laugh that drew attention wherever she went. Together, they looked like the power couple Daniel craved to be seen as. But no matter how he dressed her up, his colleagues still whispered. They knew Daniel's worth wasn't in his style, but in the favor of one man, Michael Anderson. Michael was everything Daniel wasn't: powerful, respected, untouchable. He rarely attended public events, and when he did, every eye followed him. To Daniel, Michael was both a role model and a barrier. He longed to be seen as close to the billionaire, to stand near him in photographs, to convince others he mattered in the grand world of New York's elite. So when Anderson Global announced its annual gala, a black-tie event where the city's most powerful gathered, Daniel saw it as his golden chance. This would be the night he proved he belonged. This would be the night he showed Emily and everyone else that he had moved on to something greater. He even sent Emily an invitation, not out of kindness, but cruelty. He pictured her walking in alone, dressed in something modest, standing awkwardly among women dripping in diamonds. The humiliation would be complete. Daniel had no idea, of course, that fate was about to turn his perfect plan into his greatest downfall. Because the same man he wanted to impress, the billionaire he worshipped, was the very man who would arrive at the gala holding Emily's hand. Daniel Carter had once been the man Emily trusted with her entire future. He had been the boy who made her laugh in crowded college cafeterias, the young man who promised her the stars, the husband who vowed to protect her in sickness and in health. But standing in the mirror of their sleek apartment now, Daniel hardly resembled the man Emily thought she knew. His reflection was sharp, calculated, hungry. He had traded kindness for arrogance, loyalty for ambition. To Daniel, marriage was no longer sacred. Emily, with her modest salary and gentle soul, had no place in the high-rise world he was clawing his way into. He saw her growing belly as a burden, not a blessing. "You've ruined your body already," he once spat at her when she tried on a dress. The cruelty in his voice sliced her heart in two, but he didn't care. He didn't want a wife who carried his child. He wanted a partner who could boost his image, someone who sparkled under the flashing lights of New York's elite. And so, Daniel replaced Emily with Vanessa, a woman who draped herself in designer gowns and perfume that announced her arrival before she spoke. Vanessa wasn't necessarily better than Emily. She wasn't kinder, smarter, or more genuine. But she looked the part. She fit the mold of the trophy Daniel desperately wanted. He flaunted her at parties, letting cameras capture his new life, while Emily quietly stayed home, pregnant and alone. At work, Daniel presented himself as indispensable, throwing around phrases like future partner of Anderson Global. Behind closed doors, he whispered promises to Vanessa about the empire he would one day control. In his mind, Emily was just a chapter he had closed, a weakness he had discarded. He didn't even bother to hide the affair anymore. He paraded Vanessa past Emily once, smirking as if daring her to break down in front of them. When Emily's eyes filled with tears, Daniel leaned close and whispered, "This is the life you'll never have." His betrayal wasn't just in the cheating, it was in the way he relished her suffering. Daniel enjoyed watching Emily shrink, watching her retreat into silence. He mistook her quiet endurance for defeat, never realizing that inside her heart, a small flame of strength still burned. Daniel's arrogance reached its peak when he received his invitation to the Anderson Global Gala. He told Vanessa it would be their debut, the night they would be photographed alongside the city's most powerful. But the cruelty didn't stop there. Out of twisted pride, he sent Emily an invitation as well. He wanted her to see him celebrated, to see Vanessa on his arm, to see how far beneath him she truly was. Daniel couldn't imagine that his carefully built image was nothing more than glass, fragile, ready to shatter. And the hand that would break it wasn't Emily's alone, but Michael Anderson's, the very man Daniel hoped to impress. The betrayal didn't stay behind closed doors. Daniel wanted it seen, wanted it talked about, wanted it burned into Emily's memory forever. It wasn't enough that he had walked out of their marriage while she carried his child. It wasn't enough that he had replaced her with Vanessa, the woman who glittered at his side. No, Daniel needed to humiliate Emily in the one place she couldn't hide, in public. It happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon, only a few weeks after Emily had fainted from exhaustion. She was still pale, her body fragile from the stress of carrying a child alone. She had gathered the courage to go grocery shopping, clutching her small list, determined to keep life moving despite the storm in her heart. She was in line at a cafe near the market, her umbrella dripping water onto the tiled floor, when she heard the unmistakable laugh. "Daniel." She turned, and there he was, arm wrapped tightly around Vanessa, both of them dressed as if they had stepped out of a magazine spread. Vanessa wore a white fur coat, her lips painted a sharp red. Daniel, in his tailored gray suit, smirked when his eyes locked on Emily. "Well, well," he drawled loudly, making sure the people around could hear. "If it isn't my ex-wife, still shopping for cheap groceries, I see." Emily froze. The room seemed to shrink as curious faces turned toward her. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor, but her feet wouldn't move. Her hand instinctively brushed her belly, as though shielding the tiny life inside from the poison in his words. Vanessa leaned in, her perfume overwhelming, and added sweetly, "Poor thing, she looks so tired." "But don't worry, Daniel, not everyone is meant for the spotlight. Some women are just meant to stay in the background." The words cut deeper than knives. The other customers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Emily's cheeks burned with shame. She could taste the salt of tears pressing behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of Daniel. He wanted to see her broken. He wanted witnesses. She gathered her strength, whispered a polite, "Excuse me," and turned to leave. But Daniel's voice followed, louder this time. "Emily," he called out, holding up his champagne glass from the cafe's counter as though toasting her defeat. "You should come to the Anderson Global Gala next month. Watch how a real woman shines beside me. It'll be good for you. Maybe you'll learn what success looks like." The cafe filled with awkward laughter, Vanessa giggling into Daniel's shoulder. Emily pushed the door open and stepped into the rain, her chest heaving. The drizzle soaked her hair. mixed with the tears she could no longer hold back. She clutched her stomach, whispering, "I'll protect you, no matter what." But inside her breaking heart, something stronger began to stir. Daniel thought he had crushed her. He thought this public humiliation would finish her. What he didn't know was that life had already placed someone in her path, someone powerful enough to rewrite the story. And the next time Emily saw Daniel, she would not be the woman he mocked in a cafe. She would be the woman stepping out of a limousine beside the man Daniel feared most. The rain didn't stop for days after the cafe incident, as if the sky itself mourned with Emily. She stayed curled on her couch, the lights off, the silence thick. Her body trembled as though carrying the weight of both her unborn child and her shattered pride. The humiliation replayed in her mind over and over. Daniel's smirk, Vanessa's mocking words, the stranger's stares. Each memory crushed her spirit a little more. She pressed her hand against her belly constantly, whispering, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." She felt like she was failing as a mother before she even had the chance to begin. Her doctor had warned her about stress, about how important peace was for her pregnancy, but how could she find peace when every corner of her world felt poisoned by betrayal? Nights were the worst. She would wake up sweating, heart racing, as if Daniel's cruel laughter echoed in the dark. Sometimes she thought about the future and saw nothing but emptiness. Her raising a child alone, scraping by on a teacher's salary while Daniel lived in luxury with Vanessa. Fear wrapped around her throat until she couldn't breathe. One evening, she tried calling her mother. Her voice cracked as she confessed, "I don't think I can do this." But her mother, living states away, could only offer soft words over the phone. When the call ended, Emily felt more alone than ever. She pulled the blanket over her head, muffling her sobs, terrified that even her tears might somehow hurt the baby. Her body began to give in under the weight of despair. She skipped meals, her appetite gone. Her skin grew pale, her hands shaky. The world outside her apartment moved on. Cars honking, people laughing, but inside, Emily was drowning. On the third night, she collapsed in the kitchen. A sharp pain gripped her stomach, stealing her breath. Panic surged through her veins. She clutched the counter, gasping, praying, "Please, not my baby." Somehow, she managed to call a cab to the hospital. The driver, noticing her distress, rushed through the city streets. Emily staggered into the emergency room, her hair disheveled, her clothes damp from sweat. Nurses moved quickly, placing her on a bed, checking her vitals, listening for the baby's heartbeat. The steady rhythm filled the room, and tears spilled down her cheeks in relief. Her child was still safe. For now. But the doctor's warning was clear. You cannot keep living like this. Stress can harm both you and the baby. You need support. Emily nodded weakly, but inside she wondered where that support could come from. She had no one, at least that's what she thought. Until the sound of familiar footsteps echoed down the hospital hallway. She looked up, startled, as a tall figure in a dark suit entered the room. Michael Anderson. His eyes softened when they met hers, a contrast to the commanding presence he carried in the business world. "Emily," he said gently, pulling a chair beside her bed, "you don't have to go through this alone." And in that moment, Emily felt something she hadn't in weeks. Hope. Because Michael's arrival wasn't just kindness, it was the beginning of a power shift that would change everything. Emily stared at Michael in disbelief. Of all the people she could have seen at her hospital bedside, the last person she expected was the billionaire whose name dominated New York headlines. His presence felt almost unreal. His sharp suit, his calm authority, his piercing eyes that softened only when they met hers. She tried to sit up, embarrassed by her disheveled state, but he gently placed a hand on her arm. "Don't strain yourself," Michael said, his voice steady but kind. "Your health and your child's health come first." The word child caught in Emily's chest. She had grown so used to Daniel treating her pregnancy like a nuisance that hearing someone acknowledge it with care brought tears to her eyes. She looked away quickly, ashamed to be so vulnerable in front of him. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Michael hesitated for a moment, as though weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he leaned closer. "That's not entirely true. I knew your father." Emily blinked in shock. Her father had passed away years ago, but he had once been a construction foreman known for his honesty and work ethic. He had spoken often of a man he admired, a young entrepreneur with big dreams. Could it be my father, James Carter? She asked softly. Michael nodded. He was one of the first people who believed in me when I started my company. He worked long hours on my earliest projects. He treated me like family, and he told me about his little girl, about you. I promised him, years ago, that if you ever needed help, I would be there. The room blurred as fresh tears filled Emily's eyes. She remembered her father's calloused hands, his steady voice, the way he always told her, "One day, you'll meet good people in this world who will protect you, just like I do." She had thought it was just a father's hope. Now, sitting across from Michael Anderson, she realized it had been a promise. "I can't accept this," she murmured, shaking her head. You're too important. I'm just a teacher. I don't belong in your world." Michael's gaze was unwavering. "Emily, listen to me. Value isn't measured by money or status. You belong anywhere you choose to stand, and if anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying." His words cracked something open inside her, a space that had been filled with self-doubt and Daniel's cruel voice. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt seen, not as a burden, not as a failure, but as someone worth protecting. Still, doubts lingered. Could she trust him? Was this kindness real or just pity? Her heart was fragile and she couldn't risk another betrayal. Michael seemed to sense her hesitation. He leaned back, his expression firm. "I know Daniel, and I know what he's planning for that gala. If you walk in alone, he'll try to destroy you in front of everyone." His voice hardened, the authority of a man used to commanding boardrooms. "But if you walk in with me, no one will dare." Emily's breath caught. The thought of facing Daniel again terrified her. But the idea of doing so with Michael by her side stirred something she hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. And as Michael spoke, Emily realized this wasn't just an offer of protection. It was the beginning of a war Daniel could never win. The idea of walking into the gala beside Michael Anderson sounded like something out of a fantasy. Emily could barely imagine it. Her, a simple school teacher, standing in front of New York's elite with a billionaire at her side. But fantasies, she reminded herself, always ended. Daniel had taught her that dreams could collapse without warning. For days after their conversation in the hospital, Emily wrestled with doubt. She told herself it was safer to stay invisible, to keep her head down and avoid Daniel altogether. She had already endured his cruelty at the cafe. Why expose herself to more humiliation? Yet late at night, when she pressed her hand against her belly, another thought surfaced. If I don't stand up now, what kind of example will I set for my child? Michael didn't pressure her. Instead, he visited often, always with a quiet respect for her space. He asked about her teaching, about the books she liked to read, about her father's old stories. For the first time in months, Emily laughed. Not loud, but enough to remind herself that joy was still possible. And slowly, his presence began to chip away at the walls she had built. One evening, as they sat across from each other in his office overlooking the city skyline, Michael spoke plainly. "Emily, Daniel wants to use that gala to erase you. He wants to prove to everyone that you're nothing without him. But you and I both know that isn't true. You deserve to be seen, not as a victim, but as the woman you really are." Her hands trembled as she looked out at the glittering skyscrapers. "And if I fall apart in front of everyone?" Michael leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Then I'll be right there to catch you." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. For weeks she had braced herself for pity, for empty promises. But Michael didn't speak like a man offering charity. He spoke like a man who believed in her strength more than she believed in herself. Finally, Emily whispered, "All right. I'll go." From that moment, Michael's preparations began. He introduced her to a stylist who brought elegant gowns into her modest apartment, fabrics shimmering under the soft light. For hours, Emily stood before the mirror, unsure if the woman staring back was truly her. She saw curves hidden under maternity clothes, eyes dulled by sadness, but now framed with grace. The transformation wasn't just external. Michael arranged lessons in posture and speech, not to change who she was, but to remind her she had always possessed quiet dignity. "You don't need to become someone else," he told her. "You only need to remember who you are." The final detail was the limousine. Michael insisted on it. "It's not about the car," he explained when Emily protested. "It's about the message. Daniel wants to make you small. The limousine tells him and everyone else that you are untouchable. Emily ran her fingers along the polished leather seats when she first stepped inside the car during a rehearsal. Her heart pounded. For the first time since Daniel left, she didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful. And as the engine roared to life, Emily realized she wasn't just preparing for a gala, she was preparing for a reckoning. Daniel Carter stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the knot of his silk tie, a smug smile curling across his face. Tonight was the night he had been waiting for, the Anderson Global Annual Gala. To him, it wasn't just another company event. It was his chance to prove he belonged among the giants of New York business. It was the moment he would flaunt his new life and bury the last remnants of his old one. Vanessa twirled nearby, modeling a glittering gown that clung to her like liquid gold. "Do you think your ex-wife will actually show up?" she asked with a smirk. Daniel chuckled, sipping his whiskey. "Oh, she'll come. She won't be able to resist, and when she does, everyone will see the pathetic little schoolteacher who lost everything. Standing there alone while I walk in with you? It'll be perfect." He savored the image. Emily, pale and broken, shrinking under the lights while the city's most powerful laughed behind their champagne glasses. He wanted her crushed completely, erased from his world. His cruelty wasn't just about revenge, it was about feeding his ego. Daniel needed to feel taller by making Emily smaller. In his mind, the gala was his stage. He rehearsed conversations he planned to have with investors, envisioning the approving nods, the subtle glances toward Vanessa's sparkling jewelry, the whispered comments about how far he had come. He believed Michael Anderson himself would notice him tonight, maybe even shake his hand, maybe finally see him as more than just a mid-level employee. What Daniel didn't know was how close his downfall truly was. He paced the room, barking instructions at the chauffeur, checking his cufflinks, reminding Vanessa to laugh at his jokes during the party. "We have to look like perfection," he insisted. "Every eye will be on us." Vanessa, though, seemed less impressed. She leaned against the dresser, filing her nails. "You talk about this gala like it's life or death." "It is," Daniel snapped, his voice sharp. "Reputation is everything in this city. Tonight I rise, or I'm nothing. And Emily, she's already nothing. That's what makes it satisfying." The cruelty in his words rolled off his tongue so easily that even Vanessa flinched. But Daniel didn't notice. He was too consumed by the fantasy of his own success. On the drive to the hotel, Daniel gazed out at the Manhattan skyline. The towers glimmered like jewels, reflecting his ambition. He raised his glass in a silent toast to himself. "To the future," he whispered. When the limousine carrying him and Vanessa pulled up to the hotel entrance, Daniel stepped out with exaggerated confidence. Flashbulbs popped, photographers eager to capture the arrivals of the city's elite. He straightened his jacket, took Vanessa's arm, and walked inside, imagining that all eyes were already on him. But fate had prepared a different show. Outside, another limousine was cutting through the New York traffic, its polished exterior reflecting the city lights like a mirror of destiny. And inside that limousine sat the one person Daniel never expected to see. Emily Carter, no longer broken, no longer small, about to steal the spotlight he thought was his. The gala at the Waldorf Astoria shimmered like a palace. Chandeliers cast golden light over marble floors, and the air buzzed with the clinking of champagne glasses and the murmur of power deals whispered behind polite smiles. Outside, a line of luxury cars snaked along the curb, each delivering New York's elite in sparkling gowns and polished tuxedos. But then the hum of conversation outside grew louder, shifting into a buzz of anticipation. Heads turned. Cameras lifted. A sleek black limousine, longer, shinier, more commanding than any car that had arrived that evening, pulled up to the entrance. Its polished surface reflected the city lights like liquid glass. The doors hadn't even opened yet, and already the crowd sensed something different. Something extraordinary. Daniel, standing inside the lobby with Vanessa on his arm, froze when he noticed the commotion. He craned his neck to see. "Who's that?" Vanessa asked, her tone sharp with curiosity. Daniel smirked. "Probably some big-shot investor. Maybe Michael himself." He straightened his jacket, ready to insert himself into whatever circle of power had just arrived. But when the chauffeur stepped forward and opened the limousine door, the entire entrance fell silent. First came the flash of a jeweled heel, then the sweep of an elegant gown. Emily Carter emerged slowly, her posture regal, her presence radiant. Her hair shimmered under the lights, her makeup subtle yet flawless, her every step graceful despite the quiet swell of her pregnant belly. She didn't look broken. She didn't look abandoned. She looked untouchable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers darted like wildfire. Is that Emily? Daniel's ex-wife? She looks incredible. Who's with her? And then came the second blow. From the same limousine, Michael Anderson stepped out, the billionaire himself. Tall, composed, commanding. He offered his arm to Emily, and she accepted without hesitation. Together they walked up the red carpet, the flashes of cameras exploding like fireworks. Inside the lobby, Daniel's face drained of color. His smug smile vanished as realization struck like a slap. His ex-wife, the woman he had mocked as small and unworthy, was now standing arm in arm with the most powerful man in the building, his own boss. Emily's eyes met his across the crowd. She didn't flinch, she didn't cry. Instead, she held her chin high, her gaze steady, her expression calm but unyielding. It was the look of a woman who had risen from ashes and was no longer afraid. Michael, sensing the tension, leaned slightly toward Emily and whispered something only she could hear. She smiled faintly, her hand resting protectively on her belly, a silent declaration that she and her child were no longer alone. Around them, people whispered louder, their attention fixed on the pair. Photographers clamored, desperate for shots. The entire room tilted toward Emily and Michael, leaving Daniel and Vanessa in the shadows where he thought Emily would be standing. And in that instant, Daniel realized his carefully built image was crumbling, because the spotlight he wanted so badly now belonged entirely to Emily. The moment Emily stepped through the grand entrance of the Waldorf Astoria, the entire gala shifted. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Waiters froze with trays of champagne. A ripple of whispers moved across the room like a wave breaking against the shore. All eyes locked on her, the woman Daniel had cast aside, now radiant beside Michael Anderson. Emily walked with quiet confidence, her hand resting lightly on Michael's arm. Every step echoed across the marble floor, deliberate and steady. She didn't need jewels dripping from her neck or a crown sparkling above her head. The limousine, the gown, and her poise said everything. She belonged here. Not as an afterthought, not as a shadow, but as a woman who demanded respect. The crowd couldn't look away. Isn't that Daniel's ex-wife? One guest murmured, astonished. I thought she was some small-town schoolteacher. Another leaned closer, whispering, she is, but look at her now. She's glowing. And with Michael Anderson, that's unbelievable. Emily felt the whispers circling her, but for the first time they didn't sting, they empowered her. She lifted her chin slightly, her gaze calm. The shame Daniel had tried to brand into her was gone. In its place was quiet strength, undeniable dignity. Meanwhile, Daniel's stomach churned. His glass of champagne trembled in his hand, the liquid sloshing dangerously near the rim. He forced a laugh, trying to appear unaffected, but his flushed cheeks betrayed him. So what if she's here? He muttered to Vanessa. It means nothing. Vanessa, however, was not convinced. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the room. She had seen enough galas to know when the power balance shifted. And tonight, it was tilting heavily away from Daniel. Nothing? She hissed under her breath. She just walked in with your boss, the man who signs your paychecks. Trust me, Daniel, this is everything. Daniel's confidence wavered. His perfect image, the one he had been polishing for months, cracked under the weight of Michael's presence beside Emily. How could he spin this? How could he explain why his ex-wife now commanded the spotlight he so desperately craved? The whispers grew louder. Cameras flashed, capturing Emily and Michael as though they were royalty. Investors and socialites drifted closer, eager to greet the billionaire and the mysterious woman at his side. Emily smiled politely, her hand never leaving Michael's arm. Every introduction, every handshake, every admiring glance burned Daniel deeper. He tried to laugh it off, muttering to anyone who would listen, she's just desperate for attention. Michael probably pities her. But no one seemed interested in his excuses. They were too busy watching Emily. The humiliation boiled inside him. This was supposed to be his night, his stage, his victory. Instead, it was slipping from his grasp, stolen by the very woman he had discarded. Emily caught his eye across the room. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but Daniel saw the unspoken message in her gaze. "You can't break me anymore." And as Michael guided her deeper into the gala, Daniel clenched his fists, realizing the war he started was about to play out in front of the entire city. Daniel's pulse raced as he watched Emily glide across the gala floor with Michael Anderson at her side. The image seared into his mind, her elegant gown brushing the marble, her posture flawless, her hand resting confidently on the arm of the man Daniel had worshipped for years. It felt like his entire world was tilting, but he couldn't allow anyone to see him sweat. Not here. Not tonight. He forced a smirk, downed the rest of his champagne, and straightened his jacket. "Relax," he whispered to Vanessa, who still looked uneasy. "This is smoke and mirrors. She's nothing without me, and Michael, well, he's just making a point." But Vanessa's sharp eyes weren't convinced. "Daniel, do you hear yourself? Look around. No one's looking at you anymore. They're looking at her." The truth cut like glass, but Daniel shoved it aside. He marched across the room, determined to reclaim the spotlight. He approached a group of investors who had gathered around Emily and Michael, their laughter warm, their interest genuine. For the first time, Daniel felt like an outsider in his own circle. "Gentlemen," he interrupted loudly, flashing his trademark smile. "So glad you could make it tonight. I trust you're enjoying yourselves?" The investors gave him polite nods, but their focus quickly shifted back to Michael. One of them clapped Michael on the back. "And who is this stunning companion of yours, Anderson? We didn't know you had such excellent taste outside of real estate." Emily's cheeks warmed, but she smiled graciously, her voice steady. "Emily Carter, it's a pleasure to meet you." Daniel's jaw tightened at the sound of her name spoken with such poise, without the slightest trace of shame. He jumped in quickly, trying to regain ground. "Yes, Emily is my ex-wife. She's a schoolteacher. Very modest background." His tone dripped with condescension, as though he expected laughter to follow. But instead of mocking Emily, the investors glanced at Michael, waiting for his reaction. Michael's eyes hardened, his voice calm but cutting. "Her background is nothing to belittle. In fact, I've always admired teachers. They shape the future, which is more than I can say for some who only chase appearances." The group chuckled, a few nodding in agreement. Daniel's smile faltered. The subtle jab had landed squarely, and he knew it. Michael continued, his hand resting lightly on Emily's back. "Character matters in business. Integrity matters. You can wear the best suits in Manhattan, but if you lack those two things, the room will always see through you." Emily's heart pounded. She knew those words weren't just general wisdom, they were a direct strike at Daniel, and the investors knew it too. Their eyes flicked between the men, curiosity piqued, sensing the tension beneath the polished surface. Daniel's fists curled at his sides. Rage burned in his chest, but he swallowed it down, forcing another hollow laugh. Of course," he said quickly. "Wise words, Michael." But inside, he seethed. His ex-wife was standing taller than ever. His boss was dismantling his reputation piece by piece, and the spotlight he craved was slipping further away. And as Michael led Emily toward the stage for the opening toast, Daniel realized the night he thought would crown him a king was turning into the night that might destroy him. The sound of silver spoons striking crystal glasses echoed through the ballroom, drawing the attention of hundreds of guests. The chandeliers shimmered overhead, the marble floors gleamed, and all eyes turned toward the stage as Michael Anderson took his place at the podium. Emily stood beside him, her hand brushing the smooth fabric of her gown, her pulse quickening. She wasn't used to the spotlight, wasn't used to hundreds of powerful people watching her every move. But Michael's steady presence gave her courage. He touched her arm gently before stepping forward, his calm authority filling the room even before he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice resonant, commanding the attention of everyone present. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the success of Anderson Global, but the values that built it. Integrity, perseverance, and respect. Without these, no empire, no matter how grand, can stand." Polite applause followed, but Michael wasn't finished. His eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on Daniel before softening as they returned to Emily. "I've been fortunate in my career," he continued, "but I've also learned that true strength doesn't always come from boardrooms or balance sheets. Sometimes it comes quietly, from people who endure challenges most of us cannot imagine, and yet carry themselves with dignity. Emily's breath caught. She realized the words were about her. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as people glanced at her, curious, admiring. Michael went on, his tone sharpening. I've also seen what happens when people trade integrity for appearances, when they believe status makes them untouchable. But in this city, we all know the truth. Without character, success is nothing more than glass, beautiful until the moment it shatters. The investors nodded thoughtfully. A few even exchanged knowing glances. Daniel, standing near the back of the crowd, felt the blood drain from his face. He forced another brittle smile, but his jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. He knew Michael's words were a blade aimed directly at him. Michael lifted his glass, raising it toward Emily. Tonight, I want to honor not just the company, but the resilience of those who remind us what true strength looks like. Emily Carter, thank you for reminding us that dignity, even under fire, is the most powerful legacy a person can leave. The applause that followed was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Emily felt her cheeks warm, but she held her head high. She wasn't the woman Daniel tried to humiliate in a cafe. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, valued, admired. Daniel's hands shook as he set down his untouched champagne. Around him, whispers grew louder, guests pointing subtly, curious about the schoolteacher who had entered on Michael's arm and was now being praised by him in front of the city's elite. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him, realizing that whatever story Daniel had told her about Emily being weak and pitiful no longer held weight. Michael ended his speech with a firm smile. To integrity, to resilience, and to futures built on both. Glasses clinked across the ballroom, the celebration roaring around Emily. And as Daniel watched the crowd rally around her, he knew the empire he thought he was building was already beginning to crumble. The applause for Michael's speech still echoed through the ballroom when Daniel made his move. His heart pounded with a mix of rage and panic. Everywhere he looked, guests were leaning toward Emily, eager to greet her, to shake her hand, to be associated with the woman Michael Anderson had just praised. Each smile directed at her felt like a dagger to his ego. This was supposed to be his night. He could not, would not, let Emily steal it. Vanessa tugged at his sleeve. Don't do anything stupid, she hissed, but Daniel ignored her. His pride was louder than reason. He pushed his way through the crowd, past waiters carrying trays of champagne, past clusters of investors whispering Emily's name. Finally, he reached her. Emily stood near the edge of the stage, Michael beside her, speaking with two executives who looked at her with admiration. Emily, Daniel said sharply, forcing a smile that fooled no one. A word, please. The executives fell silent, glancing between the two with raised eyebrows. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, his protective presence unmistakable. But Emily, calm and poised, nodded. Of course, she said softly. Daniel pulled her a few steps aside, lowering his voice but unable to hide the venom laced within it. What do you think you're doing? Parading yourself around like this? You don't belong here, Emily. These people aren't your world. Emily's gaze didn't falter. She stood taller, her hand resting lightly on her belly. Maybe not, she replied evenly, but they see me for who I am. That's more than you ever did. The word struck him like a slap. Daniel's jaw clenched. You think Michael really cares about you? He's using you to make a point, and when he's done, you'll be nothing again. You'll come crawling back, begging. Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile. Daniel, I'll never crawl back to the man who left his pregnant wife in the dark. I don't need you to define me anymore. Her calm confidence enraged him further. He raised his voice, forgetting where he was, forgetting the eyes watching from every corner of the ballroom. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I made you. Without me, you're nothing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests nearby exchanged shocked glances. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, mortified. Michael stepped forward then, his presence commanding silence. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Enough, Daniel. The room stilled. Even the music from the orchestra seemed to fade. Michael's eyes locked on Daniel's, his tone low and deliberate. A man who needs to belittle a woman to feel powerful is no man at all. And tonight, everyone here sees the truth. Daniel's face burned crimson. He glanced around and saw the investors' disapproving stares. The whispered judgments, the the disdain etched into every gaze. His perfect image was unraveling, thread by thread, in front of the very people he wanted to impress. And before Daniel could recover, Michael reached into his jacket, pulling out something that would turn humiliation into total destruction. The ballroom hung in silence as Michael pulled a small leather folder from his jacket. The room's golden light reflected off its polished edges, the object suddenly heavy with implication. Daniel's stomach dropped. He didn't know what Michael held, but instinct told him it was dangerous. Michael opened the folder slowly, his composure unshaken, his voice calm but cutting. "Daniel Carter," he began, his eyes never leaving the man now sweating under the weight of every stare in the room. "You've spent months trying to climb your way into circles you were never ready for. You thought appearances would cover for integrity. Unfortunately for you, appearances end where truth begins." He held up a series of documents, photocopies of company contracts and email exchanges. The investors closest to the stage leaned in, curiosity sharpening into intrigue. "These are records," Michael continued, "of unauthorized expense accounts, personal spending disguised as company investments, and emails that prove Daniel used his position at Anderson Global to funnel resources for his own gain." Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Murmurs swirled like a storm. Emily's heart raced as she watched Daniel's face turn ashen, his perfect mask shattering under the weight of exposure. "It wasn't just betrayal of a marriage," Michael said firmly. "It was betrayal of this company, betrayal of trust, and betrayal of every person in this room who believed he was a man worth respecting." Daniel lunged forward, his voice cracking. "That's a lie. You can't prove anything. This is slander." But Michael remained steady. "Every page has been verified. Legal counsel has reviewed it. You thought your actions would go unnoticed, but you forget, when you play with fire in this city, it always burns back." Vanessa stepped back slowly, her face pale, her glamorous facade dissolving. She whispered sharply, "You didn't tell me any of this." Daniel grabbed her arm, desperation dripping from his voice. "It's not true, Vanessa. Don't believe him." But she pulled away, her heels clicking as she moved to the edge of the crowd. She wanted no part of his collapse. Around them, the investors whispered in disgust. "Embezzlement? How reckless. I knew he wasn't trustworthy." The tide had turned completely. The very people Daniel sought to impress were now distancing themselves, their eyes cold and unforgiving. Emily stood still, her hand resting on her belly, watching the man who had once broken her spirit unravel in front of the world. For weeks she had lived with humiliation. Tonight, the humiliation belonged entirely to him. Michael closed the folder with finality. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "Daniel Carter is terminated from Anderson Global. Security will escort him out." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Panic surged in his chest. This wasn't just embarrassment. It was the end. His career, his reputation, his future, all collapsing in one brutal instant. And as the crowd parted for security to approach, Daniel's eyes locked on Emily, filled with rage and desperation, as though blaming her for the empire crumbling around him. The ballroom seemed to shrink around Daniel as Michael's words echoed like a gavel. Terminated. Exposed. Stripped bare in front of everyone who once admired him. He had built his entire identity on perception. Tailored suits, expensive wine, glamorous parties. And in one night, it all collapsed like glass under a hammer. Security moved toward him, their dark suits blending with the shadows of the room. Daniel tried to wave them off, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "Wait, this is a mistake. I deserve to explain myself." But no one was listening. The crowd that had once politely tolerated his arrogance now looked at him with disgust. Investors whispered sharply, their voices laced with contempt. "Unprofessional. A fraud. I can't believe we entertained him." Daniel turned toward Vanessa, his last hope for validation. She had always admired the version of him he pretended to be, the confident man of wealth and power. Surely she would stand by him now. But Vanessa's face told a different story. The glamour that once sparkled in her eyes was gone, replaced by cold calculation. She took a careful step back, her hand clutching her diamond clutch as though distance from him could preserve her image. "Vanessa," Daniel pleaded, his voice trembling. "Tell them this isn't true. Tell them." She cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. Don't drag me into your mess. I didn't sign up for this." The room gasped softly. For weeks, Daniel had flaunted her on his arm like a trophy, parading her in front of Emily as if she were proof of his superiority. And now, under the weight of truth, Vanessa slipped away without hesitation. "Vanessa!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. But she was already walking toward the exit, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her figure retreating until she vanished into the crowd. The humiliation struck deeper than any wound. Alone, stripped of power, abandoned by the very woman he sacrificed his marriage for, Daniel was nothing. He could feel the eyes burning into him, each gaze a mirror reflecting the failure he had tried so desperately to hide. Michael remained composed, his hand resting lightly on Emily's back. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He simply stood as proof of what real strength looked like. Quiet, unshakable, undeniable. Emily looked at Daniel, her heart conflicted. Once she had loved him, once she had dreamed of a life together. But the man standing before her now was not the Daniel she had married. He was a shell, hollowed out by arrogance and greed. Security placed a hand on Daniel's arm, guiding him firmly toward the doors. He jerked against their grip, shouting, "You'll regret this. All of you. This isn't the end." But the crowd only turned away. Conversations resumed, glasses clinked, laughter rose again. Daniel had become invisible in the very room he thought he would conquer. And as the doors closed behind him, Emily felt the weight of justice, but she also sensed that Daniel's bitterness might not end here. The heavy doors of the ballroom closed behind Daniel with a dull thud, cutting off his shouts of denial. The air that remained was lighter, freer, as if the room itself had exhaled the poison he carried. For a moment, there was silence, and then, slowly, a ripple of applause began to spread. At first, Emily thought it was for Michael, for the powerful way he had handled the confrontation. But as she turned her head, she realized the applause was directed at her. Faces turned toward her with admiration, respect, even warmth. These weren't just polite claps. They were genuine, heartfelt acknowledgments of her strength. Emily felt her cheeks flush, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. She had walked into this evening fearing humiliation, convinced Daniel would crush her one last time. Instead, she stood taller than ever, the crowd seeing her not as a victim, but as a woman who had endured betrayal and still carried herself with grace. One of the executives approached, extending his hand with a smile. "Mrs. Carter, it's an honor. Michael was right. You embody dignity under fire. We could all learn something from you." Her eyes widened at the title, Mrs. Carter. Once those words had bound her to Daniel, heavy with pain, but tonight they felt different, as if the name belonged not to him but to her and the legacy she would build for her child. Another guest, a woman draped in emerald silk, leaned in. "I run a foundation for single mothers. We'd love to collaborate with you. Your story is powerful." Emily stammered a thank you, her throat thick with emotion. She wasn't used to attention, to being admired. She had spent months in the shadows, shrinking under Daniel's cruelty. Now, the spotlight illuminated her not as an object of pity, but as a symbol of resilience. Michael watched from a step behind, his expression proud but restrained. He hadn't orchestrated this moment to steal her shine. He had only cleared the stage so she could claim it herself. That, Emily realized, was the difference between him and Daniel. Michael lifted her up without taking away her voice. As she spoke with guests, laughter returned to the ballroom. The music swelled again, glasses clinked, and the celebration resumed. But now, Emily was at its center. Investors asked about her teaching, guests complimented her gown, and photographers captured images of her beside Michael, immortalizing the night she stepped from humiliation into triumph. For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to breathe deeply. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was creating a story her child could one day be proud of. Yet even as warmth surrounded her, a shadow lingered in her thoughts. Daniel's eyes, filled with rage as he was dragged out, haunted her. He wasn't the type to surrender gracefully. She knew him too well. And as she stood beneath the chandeliers basking in newfound respect, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel wasn't finished, that his bitterness would soon drive him to one last desperate act. The gala carried on with glittering elegance, music swelling once more as if the chaos had never happened. Emily found herself surrounded by warmth and admiration, her confidence growing with each kind word, each handshake. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt truly safe. But outside, beyond the marble walls of the Waldorf Astoria, Daniel Carter was unraveling. He paced the cold pavement, his breath visible in the winter air, his fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his skin. The humiliation replayed in his mind. The applause for Emily, the disdainful stares, Vanessa abandoning him without a word. Rage consumed him, feeding on his pride. "They think they can just erase me?" he muttered through gritted teeth. "They think she can replace me?" His eyes burned with hatred. He couldn't stand the thought of Emily being celebrated, admired, while he was discarded like trash. In his twisted mind, the only solution was to drag her back down. Fueled by anger, he slipped past distracted security and re-entered the hotel through a side entrance. His once perfect suit was rumpled, his tie undone, his face flushed with bitterness. No longer the charming social climber, he looked like a man possessed. Inside the ballroom, Emily stood near the center, laughing softly with a group of guests. Her hand rested on her belly, her smile radiant. It was the picture of everything Daniel had lost, and everything he refused to let her keep. He stormed forward, his voice rising above the music. "Emily!" The room froze. Heads turned. The orchestra faltered to a halt. Emily stiffened, her breath catching as she saw him pushing through the crowd, his eyes wild. Fear flickered in her chest, but before it could grow, Michael was at her side, his hand steady on her back, his body shifting protectively in front of her. Daniel pointed a trembling finger, his words venomous. "You don't deserve this. You don't deserve any of it. You're nothing but a school teacher hiding behind Michael's money." Gasps echoed. Some guests tried to intervene, but Michael lifted a hand, his calm presence commanding silence. "Daniel," he said evenly, his voice sharp as steel, "you've already lost your career. Don't lose what little dignity you have left." But Daniel was beyond reason. His pride had turned into poison. He lunged forward, his hand reaching toward Emily as though to yank her from the pedestal she now stood upon. In an instant, Michael stepped between them, his tall frame a wall of protection. His voice thundered across the ballroom. "Enough!" Security rushed forward, grabbing Daniel by the arms, restraining him as he kicked and shouted. "This isn't over. She's mine. She'll always be mine." His words twisted into a desperate cry, echoing through the shocked silence. Emily's hand clutched her belly, her heart pounding. For a moment she felt the old fear creeping back. But then she looked at Michael, standing solidly before her, his presence unshakable. He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes with a calm reassurance. And as Daniel was dragged out once more, Emily realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was finally being protected by someone who would never let her fall. Daniel's screams echoed faintly as security dragged him through the marble corridors and out onto the freezing New York street. The doors shut behind him with finality, and this time there was no slipping back in. His career, his reputation, his fabricated image, all had crumbled before the very people he wanted most to impress. On the sidewalk he collapsed against a lamppost, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His phone buzzed, but the screen showed what he dreaded. Messages from investors severing ties, colleagues distancing themselves, Vanessa blocking his number entirely. The city's glittering lights mocked him. Just hours ago, he believed he was untouchable. Now he was nothing more than a man stripped bare by his own arrogance. Inside the ballroom, however, the atmosphere was transformed. The tension had lifted, replaced with admiration for Emily. Guests whispered her name with respect, praising her strength, her dignity, and the poise she had shown under fire. What Daniel had intended as her humiliation had become her coronation. Emily stood quietly beside Michael, still trying to absorb the whirlwind of the evening. She had walked into the gala fearing disgrace, and walked out of Daniel's shadow forever. The applause, the kindness, the admiration, it all felt surreal. For months she had questioned her worth, convinced she was nothing more than the broken wife Daniel discarded. Tonight had proved otherwise. Michael leaned closer, his voice low but steady. "You were remarkable tonight, Emily. Do you see now? You never needed him. You never needed anyone to tell you who you are." Her eyes glistened, tears threatening but not of sorrow, of relief. "I almost believed him," she admitted softly. I almost believed I was nothing. Michael shook his head firmly. You are more than he could ever comprehend, and the strength you showed tonight proves it. As the orchestra resumed, guests began to dance, laughter filling the air once more. Emily, still overwhelmed, found herself drawn to the tall windows overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered, reflecting the new life ahead of her. She placed a hand on her belly, whispering silently to her unborn child, "We're safe now. We're free." Michael joined her, offering his hand. For a moment she hesitated, the scars of betrayal still fresh, but then she slipped her hand into his. The gesture small, yet filled with unspoken trust. It wasn't just protection he offered, it was partnership, respect, and the chance to begin again. Behind them, the crowd continued to celebrate, unaware of the quiet transformation happening by the window. Emily wasn't the woman who had crumbled in a cafe, nor the one who wept alone in the dark. She was someone new, someone stronger, ready to face the future with her child, and perhaps with Michael by her side. Yet even as joy bloomed in her heart, Emily couldn't ignore the lingering shadow outside. Daniel's ruin was complete, but a man consumed by pride rarely lets go without one final strike. The night's celebration carried on, the ballroom filled with light and laughter, but Emily couldn't fully shake the chill of Daniel's last words. His rage, his desperation, she knew the man she once loved would not surrender quietly. Pride was the only thing he had left, and pride could be more dangerous than power. Outside, Daniel staggered through the streets, consumed by humiliation and fury. His phone buzzed again, but this time with a headline notification. Anderson Global terminates Daniel Carter amid scandal. His fall was already public. The city knew. His dreams of prestige were over. Blinded by rage, he returned to the Waldorf, slipping past the last of the distracted security at the side entrance. His suit was disheveled, his tie gone, his hair wild. He looked nothing like the man who had walked in earlier with Vanessa on his arm. This was a man undone, desperate for one final strike. Inside, Emily stood near the grand staircase with Michael, greeting guests who continued to shower her with admiration. She laughed softly, her hand resting on her belly, her heart lighter than it had been in months. But then a sudden commotion rippled across the room. Gasps erupted. Daniel was back. He stormed forward, eyes blazing, his voice cracking. "You think this is over, Emily? You think you've won?" His words dripped with venom, echoing across the marble hall. "You'll never escape me. You're mine." The crowd recoiled, horrified. Security rushed toward him, but Michael stepped forward first, his voice sharp and commanding. "No, Daniel, she was never yours, and tonight proves she never will be again." Daniel lunged, but this time he didn't reach Emily. Security tackled him to the ground, the sound of the struggle muffled beneath gasps and murmurs. His voice broke into incoherent shouts as he was dragged away for the final time, not just out of the gala, but into the custody of waiting police. Fraud charges, workplace violations, and now public disorder. His empire of lies had finally collapsed completely. Emily trembled for a moment, but Michael's steady hand reassured her. "It's over," he whispered, and this time she believed it. The crowd turned back to her, their admiration deeper now, not just for surviving betrayal, but for standing tall against the storm of Daniel's wrath. She wasn't a woman defeated. She was a woman reborn. Michael guided her to the center of the ballroom once more. As the orchestra resumed, he asked quietly, "May I?" She nodded, and together they stepped onto the dance floor. The guests watched with warmth as the billionaire and the schoolteacher moved in graceful harmony, a pairing no one had expected, but everyone now admired. Emily rested her head lightly against Michael's shoulder, a tear sliding down her cheek, not of sadness, but of release. For the first time in months, she felt free. Daniel's shadow no longer hung over her. Ahead lay a future bright with possibility, love, and dignity. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered silently to her child, "We're safe, we're loved, we're home." And as the limousine waited outside to carry her into this new chapter, Emily knew the woman who once walked in broken had left forever. The woman stepping out now was unstoppable. So that's how the story closes, my dear friends. You're still here with me, right? If you've stayed all the way to the end, then something in Emily's journey must have touched your heart. Maybe it reminded you of a time you felt invisible, betrayed, or underestimated. Or maybe it gave you hope that even in the darkest season, a new beginning is always possible. What Emily's story really teaches us is that dignity is not something another person can take away. It's something we choose to carry, no matter the circumstances. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's exactly what Emily discovered. Daniel could betray her, humiliate her, and abandon her, but he could not define her. She chose to rise. And Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Emily reacted with courage. She could have collapsed under shame, but instead she became stronger, for herself, for her child, and for the life ahead of her. Friends, maybe life has handed you betrayal, heartbreak, or rejection. But Emily's journey reminds us that those moments don't mark the end. They can be the beginning of transformation. The limousine wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of her stepping into her worth. No longer broken, but unstoppable. So if this story resonated with you, don't just keep it inside. Share it with someone who might need hope right now. Hit that like button if you felt even one tear, one smile, or one spark of strength in your heart. And make sure to subscribe, because together we'll keep telling stories that remind us we are stronger than we think. Because at the end of the day, Emily's victory can be ours too. Have you ever seen a moment so cruel it steals the air from the room? A rich man in a tuxedo slapping his pregnant wife in front of hundreds of people, and worse, doing it while holding hands with his mistress. I know it sounds like a nightmare, but it's real. And what came next? Nobody, not even him, could have predicted. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about power, art, and the rise of a woman they tried to erase. Trust me, stay until the end. Now, let's begin. The chandelier above shimmered like 1,000 stars, casting a golden glow across the grand ballroom. It was the annual Infinite Future Gala, hosted at the Montclair Hotel, a place where only the most powerful were invited. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of oysters and champagne, while a quartet played soft jazz in the background. Everything gleamed. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. The room had just gone silent. Then it happened. Smack! A sharp, sickening slap cracked through the air like lightning splitting the sky. The music stopped, conversations froze, and every head turned. Standing near the stage, in front of the charity auction podium, was Nicholas Kane, one of the richest tech moguls in America. His hands still suspended midair, his face twisted in rage. Beside him, his young mistress Kira Sloan looked smug, lips curled into a cruel smirk, and in front of him was her, Sophia Kane, 8 months pregnant. Wearing a pale blue gown that gently hugged her swollen belly, a custom piece from a forgotten designer. She didn't wear sequins or diamonds that night, just a simple silver chain and the weight of everything she had endured. Sophia staggered slightly from the force of the slap. Her hand instinctively went to her face and then down to cradle her belly. Her eyes widened, not just from the pain, but from the betrayal. The room erupted. Did he just slap her? Whispered one woman, gasping. She's pregnant, cried another, clutching her pearls. Phones were already raised, recording, capturing every second. But Nicholas, in his rage, didn't seem to care. You just had to show up, didn't you? He hissed. You had to ruin my night? Sophia blinked slowly. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Not yet. Kira's laughter broke the silence like a blade. She really thought he wanted her here, she scoffed loudly, glancing around at the frozen crowd as if inviting their agreement. Sophia slowly turned her head toward Kira. No anger, no screaming, just a deep, heartbreaking sadness. She had come here for one reason, to support her husband, the man she had stood beside through years of silence, secrets, and sacrifice. And he had just humiliated her, publicly, violently. Security hovered near the edges of the chaos, unsure whether to intervene. Sophia's sister, Eliza, pushed her way through the crowd but stopped short, tears welling in her eyes. Sophia, she called softly, but Sophia didn't move. Nicholas turned back toward the silent crowd, throwing up his hands like he was the victim. What? You don't know the full story. She's crazy. She's been stalking me. That's when Sophia finally spoke. Her voice was low but powerful, and it sliced through the ballroom like ice. I'm your wife, she said, her eyes locked on him. And I'm carrying your child. Nicholas rolled his eyes. Yeah, well, not for much longer. The gasp that followed that sentence wasn't just from the cruelty of it. It was the cold, detached way he said it. Like she was disposable. Like the baby didn't matter. like the last 10 years had been nothing. Sophia took a breath, her spine straightening. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse, but instead, something shifted, and then she smiled. Not the smile of a woman in denial, but the kind of smile that comes right before the storm. "I hope the cameras are rolling," she said softly, "because that will make the contest submission even more powerful." Nicholas's brow furrowed. "What the hell are you talking about?" But Sophia just turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble, each step steadier than the last. No tears. No screams. Just silent resolve. Later that night, the video would go viral. #Slapgate would trend for 72 hours straight. Feminist groups, celebrities, politicians, all would weigh in. But what no one knew at that moment was that Sophia's unborn child, still months from birth, would eventually recreate that exact scene with a single painting. A painting that would sweep through the global art world, capturing not just the pain, but the power of that moment. The raw truth of what it meant to be betrayed, humiliated, and still rise. But before the world saw the art, before Sophia reclaimed her name, before Nicholas Kane's empire crumbled, there was this night. A moment of unbearable pain. The kind of pain that changes a person forever. And it started, as many tragedies do, with a man who thought money gave him the right to crush the woman who built his world. But what Nicholas forgot, what Kira laughed off, what everyone in that ballroom misjudged, was that Sophia Kane wasn't just a woman scorned. She was a mother in the making. And nothing is stronger than a woman protecting her child. Sophia Grace Kane wasn't always the woman people whispered about at fundraisers and luxury galas. Long before her name was trended, twisted, and tossed around in scandal, she was just a quiet girl from Aurora, Illinois. A girl who never wanted the spotlight, who grew up in a 2-bedroom home with creaky floors and mismatched plates, where love was shown through warm meals and handmade birthday cards. She was 32, a trained art therapist. A woman who spent most of her adult life helping children process trauma through color, shape, and silence. Ironically, it was through her own trauma that she would one day change the world without meaning to. Her mother, Patricia, had been a kindergarten teacher, warm and wildly creative, always humming 80s ballads while making oatmeal. Her father, Joel, passed away when Sophia was just 9, taken by a heart attack one winter morning while shoveling snow. That day became a frozen scar in her memory. After that, it was just her and her mother. Best friends, soulmates. Sophia didn't grow up around wealth. She didn't understand silk table linens or $20,000 clutches. But she understood people. She understood emotions. She understood pain. That's why she went into therapy. Not for the prestige, but for the purpose. She never cared for grand things, even when she met Nicholas. Nicholas Kane. Back then, he wasn't the headline-hungry mogul he would become. When they met, he was charming, passionate, and full of dreams. He was still building his tech company, working late nights out of a rented co-working space. They met at a charity silent auction for underfunded schools. Sophia had been invited last minute by a fellow therapist who couldn't attend. She had no plans to bid on anything. She barely had student loan payments under control. But she went anyway, lured by the promise of free snacks and quiet conversation. Nicholas spotted her by the hors d'oeuvres table. She wore a knee-length thrifted dress, navy blue with a slightly crooked zipper. He said she looked like calm in a room full of noise. She laughed. He told her she had poet's eyes. She rolled her own. They talked all night about childhood dreams, about their moms, about their fears. He told her he wanted to build technology that made people's lives better, not just richer. She told him about a 6-year-old boy who drew only in red and refused to speak after his father went to prison. They weren't from the same world, but something about the way he listened and the way she saw right through him created a pull neither of them could resist. Within months, they were inseparable. Nicholas proposed a year later, kneeling in a patch of sunflowers in a field outside Napa. The ring wasn't huge, but it was his grandmother's, and the moment was perfect. Sophia believed she was living a love story. She believed he saw her, not just as a partner, but as an anchor. She moved into his small condo. She made his favorite meals. She decorated their first office space with potted succulents and handmade signs that read things like innovation with heart. She celebrated every funding round with him. every tech award, every late-night pitch rehearsal. And slowly, as his world expanded, hers shrank. She put her art therapy career on hold to help him travel, to be available when he needed her. She still volunteered, still taught kids to draw through their grief. But her own voice, her own needs, they got quieter. She didn't notice at first. That's the thing about losing yourself in love. It doesn't come like a fire, it comes like fog. The bigger Nicholas's company became, the more distracted he grew. His smiles grew shorter, his touches colder. Their late-night talks turned into late-night meetings, meetings she was no longer invited to. Sophia told herself it was just a phase, the stress of expansion, the burden of success. She told herself this even when he started dressing differently, talking differently, surrounding himself with people who valued wealth over wisdom. She still made excuses when he missed dinner, or forgot her birthday, or pulled away when she tried to kiss him in public. Because Sophia didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to believe the man she fell in love with, the man who once wrote her love letters on hotel notepads and made pancakes shaped like hearts, could disappear into power. Then she got pregnant. It was unexpected, not planned, but not unwelcome. When she saw the pink line, something in her lit up. Fear, yes, but also hope. She thought maybe this was what they needed, a reset, a reason to reconnect. When she told Nicholas, he stared at her for a full minute before finally saying, "That's wow. Okay." That night, he didn't come home. The pregnancy was rough, morning sickness, fatigue, loneliness. She attended her ultrasounds alone. She bought the crib alone. She talked to her belly more than she talked to her husband. Still, she didn't give up. She painted the nursery in soft yellows and kept sending Nicholas sonogram photos. He rarely replied. When she finally confronted him, really confronted him, he didn't deny it. There was someone else, younger, wilder, more aligned with his lifestyle. Sophia didn't cry that night. She didn't scream. She just sat there, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and listened to him describe how he'd outgrown their marriage. "I need someone who understands ambition," he'd said. You're stuck in comfort." That's when she knew. It wasn't that she wasn't enough. It was that he never truly saw her. He only saw what she gave him. And the moment she stopped giving, he started looking elsewhere. But what Nicholas Kane failed to realize, what he never paused long enough to consider, was that Sophia Kane was never just his support system. She was her own force. And the child she carried would carry more than just blood. They would carry her strength, her vision, her fire. The Montclair Grand Ballroom was a masterpiece of modern opulence. Towering archways framed with gold leaf opened into a sea of white marble, each tile polished to perfection until it reflected light like water. Crystal chandeliers hung from 30-foot ceilings, each one sparkling like frozen fireworks. The scent of imported roses, fresh from Ecuador, mingled with hints of caviar, champagne, and truffle oil from the caterers drifting through the air. This was not just any event, it was the Infinite Future Gala, an annual gathering of the world's wealthiest entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and philanthropic elites. The kind of people who donated millions over hors d'oeuvres and made business deals in between jazz sets. The theme that year was Innovation Meets Impact. Banners with bold fonts hung from the mezzanine, featuring portraits of tech leaders and their charitable foundations. Every guest received a program wrapped in silver ribbon, detailing the night's auction items and honorees, including, at the top of the list, Nicholas Kane. The very same Nicholas Kane who would moments later slap his pregnant wife in front of the entire room. But hours before that moment, before the gasp, the silence, the phones raised in disbelief, the evening began with glamour. Sophia Kane stood just inside the marble entrance, clutching a beaded clutch in one hand, the other resting lightly on her belly. She hadn't been to a gala in over a year. Her maternity dress, a custom pale blue silk design, hugged her figure modestly. She wore no diamonds, no glittering tiara, only small pearl earrings and a gentle dignity that somehow made her stand out more than the women dripping in gold. She almost hadn't come. Part of her wanted to skip it entirely. She knew Nicholas would be there with Kira, his 25-year-old strategic branding consultant, who was now far more than just an employee. But something inside Sophia had told her to go. Not to cause a scene, but to be seen. For the first time in months, she had done her makeup with care. soft, smoky eyes, neutral lipstick. She curled her chestnut hair into waves that spilled down her back. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. As she stepped inside, people noticed. Not just because she was visibly pregnant, but because of her calm, her quiet strength, the kind of presence that made people whisper even if they didn't know why. "Is that Sophia Kane?" one woman whispered. "She looks incredible," murmured another. Sophia didn't hear them. She didn't need to. She walked slowly, deliberately, scanning the room until her eyes landed on him. Nicholas. He was holding court at the front of the room, near the silent auction tables. Surrounded by investors and influencers, he laughed loudly, his hand resting casually on the small of Kira's back. Kira wore a plunging red gown that clung to every curve, her blonde hair swept into a high ponytail. She looked like every stereotype of the woman who gets chosen second, but loves every minute of it. Sophia paused, her stomach tightening, not from fear but from something more primal. She moved toward the far side of the room, pretending not to see him. Her plan had been simple. Stay quiet, congratulate the right people, and leave. But fate, as it always does in stories like this, had other plans. A few minutes into the evening, the MC took the stage. Spotlights beamed down as he welcomed the guests. "Tonight," he announced, "we honor a visionary, a man who changed the world of tech, who invests not only in innovation, but in humanity. Please welcome Nicholas Kane." Applause erupted. Cameras turned. Nicholas adjusted his cufflinks, then began his slow, confident walk to the stage, Kira on his arm. He didn't see Sophia at first, but Kira did, their eyes locked like gunfire across the room. Kira's smirk widened. She leaned in and whispered something into Nicholas's ear. That's when he turned. Their eyes met, and for a brief second the noise faded, the lights dimmed, and it was just the two of them. One man, one woman, 10 years of history. Nicholas didn't blink. He didn't smile. He stared at her like she was a problem that had followed him into his new world. Sophia didn't look away. When he reached the stage, Nicholas launched into his usual charm routine. Thanked his team, thanked the investors, thanked the audience, never once mentioned his wife. And as he stepped down, the room seemed to lean toward him, waiting to see what would happen next. Sophia had planned to leave then. She had promised herself she wouldn't get involved. But as Nicholas walked back into the crowd, Kira clinging to him like a badge of conquest, something in Sophia cracked. She walked toward them. Not fast, not storming, just steady. And when Nicholas turned and saw her approaching, his face froze. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. "I was invited," she said evenly, "like every year." Kira rolled her eyes. She probably thought this was a school fundraiser. The insult barely registered. Sophia kept her gaze on Nicholas. "Congratulations," she said, nodding to the plaque in his hand. The speech was nice, a little ironic, but nice. "Leave," Nicholas whispered sharply. "Now." "You're making a scene," Kira added. Then came the moment. The moment no one could take back. Nicholas stepped closer to her. Too close. And with the entire ballroom watching, phones already raised, he raised his hand and struck her. A slap that echoed through more than just air, through history, through hearts, gasps, screams. Chairs scraped the marble. Sophia didn't fall. She straightened and said only one thing. "You'll regret that." Nicholas Kane was once considered the ideal modern mogul, a visionary, a man who climbed out of a tiny rented studio apartment in Brooklyn and rose to dominate the tech world. His software company, Kaneverse, became a household name after revolutionizing remote work platforms. By 35, he was on the cover of Time magazine. By 37, he was giving TED Talks about digital empathy. But behind the sleek suits and polished sound bites was a man no one really knew, except Sophia, and she knew him too well. Nicholas had always had a hunger in his eyes, even during the early days when he would cook pasta in their tiny kitchen and promise he was doing it all for them, for there was a fire in him that never settled. He was obsessed with winning, not just financially, emotionally. He didn't just want to succeed. He wanted to be envied. At first, Sophia mistook that ambition for drive. She supported him, defended him, forgave his long absences, his sharp words, his rising ego. Even when he started making subtle jabs at her career and therapy, "You help kids draw pictures while I close billion-dollar deals," she brushed it off. She told herself he was stressed, that success was changing him, that if she just stayed patient, he'd come back to her. He didn't. Instead, he found someone new, and not quietly. Kira Sloan entered their lives through a rebranding campaign. She was hired to revamp Kane versus Image. More bold, more daring, more Gen Z. Sophia met her once in a boardroom filled with glass and tension. Kira wore a white blazer with nothing underneath. She greeted Sophia with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and called her sweetheart like they were old friends. Sophia didn't miss the way Kira leaned into Nicholas during the meeting, or how Nicholas kept glancing at her lips. It didn't take long after that for things to unravel. Nicholas stopped coming home on weekends, stopped touching Sophia, stopped pretending. The first time she asked him directly, "Are you cheating on me?" he laughed, a soft, cruel laugh. "You always make everything so dramatic," he said. "It's just work." But it wasn't just work. It was Kira. And Sophia knew it. She found hotel receipts, a lipstick-stained cocktail napkin in his jacket pocket, a message on his phone, "I missed last night already," from a contact saved as Kevin. When she confronted him again, there was no more denial, no more lies. "Yes," he said flatly, "and no, I'm not sorry." He didn't apologize. He didn't try to explain. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he accused her of being the problem. "You've changed," he said. "You used to be exciting. Now all you do is nest and whine and act like your pregnancy gives you moral authority. Newsflash, it doesn't." Sophia stood in their kitchen that night, heart pounding, belly heavy, hands shaking, and Nicholas? He packed a bag and left without looking back. The next day, tabloids exploded. Tech titan Nicholas Kane spotted with mystery blonde. A week later, meet Kira Sloan, Kane versus sexy new muse? Photos followed, of Nicholas and Kira in Malibu, kissing on a yacht, holding hands at a fashion show. The world devoured their affair like candy. And Sophia? She became a ghost, erased from the narrative. Even their shared friends distanced themselves. Whispers began. Maybe she was boring, he outgrew her, she was just a therapist. What did she expect? But Kira Sloan wasn't just a mistress, she was a strategist. She knew how to play every angle, on Instagram, in boardrooms, on red carpets. She posted vague captions like, "Don't settle for safe when you can have spectacular," with photos of her wrapped in Nicholas's arms. She gave interviews subtly painting herself as misunderstood. And behind closed doors, she told Nicholas to cut Sophia off financially. "She'll be fine," Kira said. "She'll figure it out. Focus on us." Nicholas listened. Sophia's credit cards were frozen. Her car, leased under Nicholas's name, was repossessed while she was at a prenatal checkup. The mortgage on the home they shared was suddenly under renegotiation, and her name was quietly removed from the title. Sophia was 7 months pregnant, and she was being erased. But what neither Nicholas nor Kira understood, what they completely underestimated, was that betrayal doesn't destroy a woman like Sophia. It awakens her. She didn't scream or beg. She didn't go to the press. She didn't even reply to the tabloid requests. She just started planning, quietly, intelligently, with the same patience she once used to help children find their voice through art. Nicholas had taken her comfort, but not her power. And Kira? For all her designer clothes and public confidence, she couldn't hide the fact that she was still a shadow standing in Sophia's light. The night of the gala, the moment Sophia walked in, Kira knew. She saw it in Nicholas's eyes. The moment he saw Sophia standing at the entrance in that soft silk dress, glowing with quiet defiance, something shifted. It was the first time he'd looked uncertain in weeks. And Kira felt it. That's why she pushed him. That's why she whispered, "Are you really going to let her ruin this night?" That's why Nicholas raised his hand, not just out of anger, but out of fear, because deep down he knew he had made a grave mistake. And Sophia? She was done staying silent. The moment would be replayed a million times, from phone screens to primetime news, pixelated, slowed down, dissected frame by frame. But nothing could compare to what it felt like being there. Right there, under the gold chandeliers of the Montclair Ballroom, right in the middle of New York's wealthiest crowd, right in front of CEOs, journalists, influencers, and investors. When Nicholas Kane slapped his pregnant wife, the sound echoed like thunder over a glassy lake. Sophia Kane didn't fall, but the way she stood, still, stunned, one hand over her cheek, the other over her belly, pierced the air like a silent scream. Her calm grace made the act feel even more barbaric. The world didn't just witness a slap. They witnessed an unraveling. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then came the gasp, the ripple of hands over mouths, the flash of phone cameras. Some tried to pretend they didn't see. Others turned away out of fear or cowardice. But a few brave souls stood frozen, their eyes wide in horror. Even the string quartet had stopped mid-note. Nicholas, breathing hard, didn't seem to understand the gravity of what he'd just done. "You think you can show up here and embarrass me?" he hissed, stepping toward Sophia again, like he still had control. Kira Sloan, his mistress, didn't stop him. In fact, she smirked. She stood tall in her red dress, a glass of Dom Perignon in hand, eyes gleaming with cruel delight. She whispered something under her breath, something only those closest to her could hear. "She's always had a flair for drama." That comment, later captured on a hot mic from a nearby TV reporter, would be played endlessly, quoted in articles, condemned across the internet. But Sophia didn't respond. Not to the slap. Not to the whisper. Not to the crowd now circling like vultures, unsure whose side they were supposed to be on. Instead, she took a breath, straightened her spine, and said, "You're going to regret this." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words hung in the air like prophecy. She turned and walked away. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the stunned silence. No one tried to stop her. No one dared. Security didn't move. The event coordinator froze. Kira raised her eyebrows as if amused, while Nicholas watched Sophia disappear into the crowd, his chest heaving with a mix of rage and something else, panic. Because somewhere, in the depths of his ego, he knew. He had gone too far. The night unraveled after that. People whispered in corners, debating what to do. Someone called the board of the Kane Foundation. Someone else alerted the PR team. Within minutes, damage control went into full spin. She provoked him. She's emotionally unstable. She's hormonal. But the videos told the truth. The videos, captured from 5 different angles, within minutes uploaded to every platform imaginable, showed a calm, pregnant woman being struck by her husband. And the internet doesn't forget. By midnight, the hashtags had started trending. Justice for Sophia, Kane cancelled, pregnant and powerful. At home, Sophia sat on her living room couch, wrapped in a blanket, barely speaking. Her sister Eliza had picked her up from the gala, clutching her like glass the entire ride home. Sophia hadn't cried. Not yet. She just sat there, her hand gently resting on her stomach, staring blankly at the dark TV screen. "You should go to the police," Eliza said, pacing the room, "or the press, or file a restraining order, something." Sophia shook her head. "Not yet." "But he hit you, Sophia. In public, with that woman right there." "I know," she said quietly. "Do you want revenge?" Sophia's eyes slowly lifted to meet her sister's. They weren't red. They weren't wild. They were focused. "I want truth," she said. "I want the world to see what he really is. And I want our child to know I didn't break." That was all she said. The next morning, she woke to hundreds of missed calls. Journalists, lawyers, activists, strangers, women who had seen the video and wanted to stand with her. But Sophia didn't post anything. She didn't go live. She didn't do interviews. She did something else. She called her old mentor, Julia Rivera, a renowned human rights artist, and asked for canvas, paint, and silence. Then she began to paint. In her sunlit studio, surrounded by baby clothes and unopened gifts from baby showers she never had, she painted what she remembered. Not just the slap, but the moment, the colors, the stillness, the cruelty, the truth. What came out was a masterpiece, a raw, haunting scene. Sophia, mid-turn, with a soft glow over her belly. Nicholas's hand in motion, caught between violence and regret. Kira's smile painted like a slash of red against the backdrop of glittering chandeliers and cold, watching eyes. It was titled simply, "The Moment." And when her baby was born, 2 months later, healthy, strong, beautiful, Sophia submitted the painting in her child's name to the International Motherhood and Art Showcase. No one expected it to win. But it did. Not just the showcase, but every category. Critics called it the most important painting of the decade. News anchors called it a revolution in color. And Sophia? She stayed quiet, because the art said everything. The following days after the gala felt like walking through glass. Sophia Kane woke up to the sound of her name trending across the internet, but her body still trembled from the slap. Not from the physical sting, it had faded, but from the emotional weight it left behind. Betrayal didn't leave bruises on the skin, it carved into the soul. The walls of her townhouse felt colder now. The nursery she had so lovingly painted in soft yellows now looked like a hollow fantasy. The tiny clothes folded on the dresser, the ones with ducks and clouds, felt like props from a life that wasn't hers anymore. Sophia sat in bed for hours, staring at the sunlight pouring through the curtains. Her phone buzzed non-stop, messages from strangers, some offering support, some begging for interviews, some just sending stories of their own heartbreaks. She ignored them all. She didn't have the strength to explain herself, to speak, to be anything but still. Eliza came by daily, trying to coax her out of bed, sometimes with soup, sometimes with firm words, sometimes with a hug. But Sophia stayed quiet. "I just want to disappear," she whispered once. Eliza knelt beside her bed, her voice cracking. "You don't get to. You're not done yet." But Sophia felt done. She felt broken in places she couldn't name. Even simple things became impossible. Brushing her teeth, eating, standing too long. She was 8 months pregnant, and her body ached. Her heart ached more. She thought about the night she met Nicholas, the way he looked at her like she was magic. She remembered their first apartment, their inside jokes, how he'd make her pancakes shaped like hearts. How did it all become this? A slap, a mistress, a viral scandal. Every time she tried to move, memories pinned her down. One afternoon, she wandered into the nursery and sat on the floor, her back against the crib. She stared at the wall where she'd painted a tree. It had bright leaves and tiny birds. A tree full of life. But now it felt like a lie. Tears came then. Heavy, ugly sobs that racked her entire body. She cried for herself, for her baby, for the woman she used to be. She cried until her breath came in hiccups, until her throat burned, until she couldn't cry anymore. And even then, she kept sitting. The world outside kept spinning. News anchors debated the ethics of filming trauma. Feminist leaders cited her case as a wake-up call. Protesters stood outside Caneverse headquarters demanding justice. Nicholas issued a cold public apology, saying it was a moment of stress. Kira posted a cryptic Instagram story. Some people need drama to stay relevant. Sophia didn't respond. She watched it all like a movie playing without her. People assumed she was plotting revenge, but the truth was, she didn't know what to do next. She felt nothing, and everything. All at once. Then came the night she collapsed. She was alone in the kitchen, trying to warm up soup. Her hands were shaking from days of barely eating. As she reached for the pot, a sharp pain shot through her back. Her knees buckled. She hit the floor hard. She lay there staring at the ceiling, too scared to scream. One hand flew to her belly, feeling the baby move, thank God. The other reached for her phone, but it had fallen under the counter. She couldn't reach it. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. This is it, she thought. This is how it ends. Then she heard pounding at the door. Her sister's voice. Sophia! Open up. Eliza had been calling. When Sophia hadn't answered, she'd driven over. She found the door unlocked and ran in to see Sophia on the tile floor, her lips pale, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. An ambulance was called. Sophia was taken in on a stretcher, clutching her stomach like a shield. At the hospital, tests were run. The baby was okay, but Sophia was dehydrated, malnourished, and emotionally exhausted. The doctor's words were clinical but clear. You need to rest, Mrs. Kane. You're in survival mode. Sophia turned her head away. She didn't want to survive. She wanted to live. But she didn't know how to anymore. That night, she lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles. It was quiet, except for the gentle beep of the monitor and the baby's heartbeat echoing in the room. That sound, steady and strong, did something to her. She realized she wasn't alone. That tiny rhythm, that little life inside her, it was counting on her. And that's when something inside Sophia shifted. She wasn't ready to fight yet, but she wasn't going to give up. Not for her baby, not for herself. The next morning, Eliza brought her a sketch pad. You don't have to talk, she said gently. Just draw. At first, Sophia stared at the blank page like it was a stranger. But slowly, she picked up the pencil. Her hands moved without thought. She drew a face, hers. Eyes red, hair messy, tears streaming, then another page, the slap, then another, the moment after, and then color. The first color she had touched in weeks, a soft blue, a bold red, a gold chandelier. She didn't know it yet, but she was starting to heal. Not with revenge, but with creation, with truth, with art. It started with an envelope. A plain, cream-colored envelope slid under Sophia Kane's hospital room door in the middle of the night. No name, no return address, just her first name written in delicate script, Sophia. At first, she thought it was another sympathy letter. Since the gala scandal, people had sent everything from handwritten poems to flower arrangements that filled entire rooms. She didn't open most of them. Her heart wasn't ready. But something about this envelope felt different. It was heavier and personal. She waited until morning before opening it. Sunlight poured in through the blinds as she tore the seal. Inside was a single letter and a document attached with a gold paperclip. Sophia, I know what he did, and I know who you really are. You don't need to suffer in silence anymore. It's time you remembered what you're capable of. The trust your grandmother created is still active. Everything is waiting for you. The world sees you as a victim. Let's remind them who you really are. Jasper Flint. Sophia blinked at the name. Jasper Flint, her family's former attorney, the man who had managed her grandmother's estate after her passing, the man who had promised to disappear unless she ever needed him again. And now he was back. She read the attached documents carefully. At first, her hands shook. Then her breath caught. It was all still there. The inheritance, the assets, the dormant investments in Swiss banks, the shares in the green energy conglomerate her grandmother had helped build, the multi-million-dollar property trust in her name. All of it. Untouched. Hidden behind legal protections. She hadn't touched a dime of it when she married Nicholas. She hadn't wanted him to know. Back then, she thought hiding her wealth would prove she wasn't like the women who chased power. She thought living simply was a way to build something real. She never told Nicholas. She never told anyone. She had left behind billions for love. And now she saw what love had cost her. Sophia closed the folder. Her fingers curled tightly around the pages. Her mind began to shift, reorganizing itself like a machine being rewired. She wasn't a broken woman anymore. She was a billionaire who had been betrayed, and she was done hiding. That afternoon, she called Jasper. His voice was the same as she remembered, calm, clipped, endlessly professional. "It's good to hear from you, Mrs. Kane." "It's Ms. Laurent now," she said. "I'm ready to reactivate the trust, but I want everything moved under a different name." "I anticipated that." "Shall we use the child's?" "Yes," she said. "Name the account after my baby." She hadn't even given birth yet, but already she was laying the foundation for something more powerful than revenge, a legacy. Within days, her world shifted behind the scenes. Bankers were called, properties were reassigned, security was arranged, and most importantly, Jasper connected her with a media team. Not for interviews, but for strategy. "I don't want to explain myself," Sophia said. "I want the truth to speak through art." He nodded. "Understood. But just so you know, Kaneverse stock has dropped 14% since the incident. Shareholders are questioning Nicholas's leadership." "Let them." She didn't need to attack him. He was doing it to himself. Nicholas still hadn't reached out, not to apologize, not to check on the baby, not to ask how she was coping. But she heard whispers. His team was scrambling, his brand deals were on pause, several nonprofits had severed ties, investors were nervous, he was losing control, and he had no idea just how bad it was going to get. Because Sophia wasn't just healing, she was rebuilding. With every brushstroke, every sketch, every canvas she filled in her new private studio, funded by the very fortune she once ran from. She found herself again. She painted without limits, scenes of strength, of mothers, of silence, of fire. One painting in particular stood out. It was titled Inheritance. A woman holding her baby. Behind her, flames. In front of her, a mountain of gold. But her gaze, steady, unflinching, looked not at the gold or the fire, but straight at the viewer, daring them to look away. Sophia didn't submit it under her name. She entered the piece in an international contest under her unborn child's name, Elle Laurent. The theme of the contest was resilience. She never expected to win. But weeks later, she received the call. "You've been selected as the grand prize winner," the voice on the phone said. "It's the most powerful submission we've received in years." The painting would be displayed at the Global Museum of Modern Art, and it would tour internationally. When the press release went out, Sophia didn't make a statement. But the art world was stunned. Who is Elle Laurent? Became a trending search term. And Nicholas? He didn't find out until a reporter shoved a photo in his face at a press event. "Any comment on the award-winning painting by Elle Laurent? Sources say the child may be yours." Nicholas stared at the image, the woman, the baby, the fire. He froze. And that's when it hit him. He hadn't just lost his wife. He'd awakened a legacy he could never control. Sophia Kane, no, Sophia Laurent, no longer moved like someone uncertain. The soft, hesitant steps she used to take, always careful not to make things worse, had been replaced with the confident rhythm of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. Her walk had power now. Her voice, when she chose to use it, landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. It had been 5 weeks since the art contest went public, since the painting Inheritance began its world tour. Sophia still hadn't spoken to any media outlet. She had no need to. The public was already on her side. Victim turned visionary, artist turned activist, billionaire by bloodline. But behind the scenes, the real transformation was happening. It started with her wardrobe. Gone were the soft, forgettable dresses she once wore to fade into Nicholas's shadow. In their place, sharp silhouettes, crisp white blazers, structured gowns with fierce necklines. Nothing too flashy, just the kind of style that said, "I'm not trying to impress you. I already won." Her team, handpicked by Jasper, was small but lethal. A lawyer, a strategist, and a silent investor from Geneva who owed her grandmother a favor. Together, they built a new foundation in her baby's name, the Laurent Initiative. Its mission? Protect and empower women navigating abuse during pregnancy. In less than a month, it raised $4.6 million in pledges. The first gala was set, and Sophia would be the guest of honor. But it wasn't just about making a statement. It was about reclaiming the spaces she once tiptoed through. Taking up space, breathing without apology, living fully. She had moved out of the townhouse, too many ghosts. Now she lived in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park, a property held in a silent trust for years. The floors were walnut. The art was hers. The crib in the nursery was hand-carved maple. She would bring her baby into a new kind of home, one with no secrets, no begging for love, no walking on eggshells. Her therapist said this transformation was rare, not because women weren't capable of rising, but because so many didn't get the chance. "You caught yourself," she said once, "before the world erased you." But Sophia didn't feel lucky. She felt focused. The revenge everyone expected never came, not in the way Nicholas thought it would. She didn't sue him, didn't ruin him publicly. She didn't need to. He was unraveling just fine on his own. Caneverse stock plummeted another 22%. Several executives resigned. Photos of Nicholas looking disheveled in airports surfaced weekly. Kira posted less often. Her tone had shifted, more defensive, more cryptic. "People will twist anything. I'm just trying to live my truth," she wrote under a post that got 84,000 hate comments. But Sophia, she remained silent. Until the night of the Laurent Gala. That was the moment everything changed again. The gala was held at the Rosewood Conservatory, marble halls, glass ceilings, and candlelight flickering in crystal holders. The guest list included Fortune 500 CEOs, global philanthropists, and several major press outlets. But all eyes were on the woman who entered last, Sophia. She arrived in a floor-length black velvet gown, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. No jewelry except a diamond ring on her right hand, her grandmother's. She didn't speak to the cameras, just walked, tall and radiant, into the space she now owned. When she took the stage, the room fell silent. "I was told," she began, "that silence is strength, that dignity means saying nothing when you're hurt, but I disagree." Her voice was steady, low, controlled. "True strength is speaking, creating, rebuilding." She paused. "I've been many things, daughter, therapist, wife, but today I stand here as a mother, and this legacy is for my child, and for every woman who thought silence was the only way to survive." Thunderous applause. Later, backstage, an executive from the Global Women's Council approached her with an offer to become an ambassador. A fashion house offered a campaign. A museum wanted a solo exhibit. She accepted none of them. "I'm not a brand," she said quietly. "I'm a builder." And she meant it. Over the next month, Sophia hired 10 women, each one a survivor, artists, coders, lawyers, mothers. She funded their projects, their dreams, their healing. And in private, she prepared for birth. There were still hard nights, still shadows, still moments when she looked at her baby bump and felt waves of fear. But then she remembered the slap, the silence, the moment everything shattered, and she'd place her hand on her belly and whisper, "We survived." She went into labor early one morning. No cameras, no entourage. Just Eliza holding her hand and a delivery room that smelled like lavender and courage. The baby came screaming into the world, tiny fists raised, lungs strong, a girl. Sophia held her close, tears falling freely now, and whispered, "You are mine, and I am yours. We build from here." The birth certificate listed one parent, Sophia Laurent, and under name of child, Luna Laurent, L for legacy and light. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a screaming match. It wasn't a dramatic press conference. It was a gallery. The Laurent Foundation had announced its first official international exhibition, titled Mothers of Resistance. The event would be held at the Astoria Hall in Manhattan, an elite venue typically reserved for royalty-level donors and world leaders. But on that Thursday night, it belonged to Sophia Laurent. The invitation-only crowd buzzed with anticipation. Rumors had already spread that the artist behind the viral painting Inheritance, L. Laurent, was somehow connected to Sophia. But no one could prove it, until that night. The gallery itself was drenched in soft gold lighting, each painting hung with a single spotlight. Guests wandered from one image to the next in silence, reading titles like The Invisible Bride, Bruises You Can't See, and Room 328. In the center of the room, veiled by white silk, stood the newest piece. The crowd gathered around it as Sophia took the stage. She wore an ivory suit tailored with razor-sharp edges. In her arms was her newborn daughter, Luna, wrapped in soft cream cloth. Her presence alone silenced the room. "I was told once that to survive pain, you must forget it," she began. "But I think survival is not about forgetting. It's about making it unforgettable, for the right reasons." A spotlight moved toward the silk-covered frame. Sophia looked down at her daughter, then back at the audience. "And tonight," she continued, "I share with you the moment that made me, that nearly broke me, that gave birth to her." With a nod, the silk fell. The room gasped. There it was, the slap. Frozen in paint, reimagined in stunning, brutal detail. Sophia, her face mid-turn, one hand on her swollen belly. Nicholas, hand raised. Kira in the background, blurry, irrelevant. The chandelier gleamed above them like a cruel halo. The piece was titled Breaking Point. The plaque read, Artist L. Laurent, medium, oil on canvas. Owned and exhibited by the Laurent Foundation. Donated by Sophia Laurent. Nicholas had not been invited, but he came anyway. Of course he did. He arrived late, wearing his signature black coat and a desperate expression. He hadn't seen the piece until the moment it was revealed. And when he did, the color drained from his face. He moved closer, mouth slightly open, almost in disbelief. The crowd parted for him like smoke. Someone snapped a photo of the moment, him staring at the painting that immortalized his downfall. Later, it would be shared with the caption, "This is what accountability looks like." Nicholas stood frozen in front of the painting. Then his voice broke the silence. This is slander." Sophia didn't flinch. She walked calmly toward him, her daughter still in her arms. "This is truth," she said, "and the world finally sees it." Nicholas's jaw clenched. "You're trying to destroy me." "I don't have to," she replied, her voice cool. "You did that yourself. I just painted it." Then, calmly, she turned her back to him and walked away. The cameras didn't follow him. They followed her. Sophia gave a brief statement to the press outside the gallery. "I didn't make this exhibit for revenge. I made it for clarity, for justice, for my daughter, and for every woman who's been silenced, slapped, or shamed into staying quiet." The next morning, headlines dominated every feed. Sophia Laurent reveals she's behind L. Laurent art, the slap immortalized. Caneverse CEO humiliated by ex-wife's award-winning exhibit. From silence to spotlight, Sophia's masterpiece destroys Nicholas Kane. But the biggest blow wasn't public. It came privately. The Laurent Foundation announced it had acquired 4.8% of Caneverse stock. Enough to request a shareholder vote, enough to demand accountability, enough to push Nicholas out. The board didn't hesitate. His approval ratings had tanked. His recent behavior had cost them millions. And Sophia? She didn't just hold the pen now. She held the vote. The board met within the week. Sophia didn't attend in person. She submitted her proxy vote with a letter that simply read, "I believe Caneverse needs to return to its original vision, empathy through innovation, and that starts with new leadership." The vote passed. Nicholas Kane was ousted. Just like that. The man who once slapped his pregnant wife at a gala now found himself removed from his own empire, voted out by the woman he tried to silence. And Kira? She quietly deleted her social media accounts a day later. No more cryptic captions, no more red carpet appearances. She vanished from the narrative as quickly as she entered it. Justice didn't come with fireworks, it came with stillness, with clarity, with a woman reclaiming her power, not with fists or fury, but with art. The painting Breaking Point now hangs in the National Museum of Modern Art under tight security, constantly surrounded by visitors, educators, and students. It's studied in universities, quoted in activism seminars, admired by survivors across the world. But Sophia, she doesn't dwell on it. She's busy raising Luna, teaching her to speak boldly, teaching her to paint without fear, teaching her that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is telling the truth beautifully. There's a quiet kind of strength that doesn't shout, it doesn't throw punches, it doesn't make noise, it stands, it breathes, it endures. Sophia Laurent didn't rebuild her life with vengeance in her heart. She rebuilt it with purpose, with clarity, with love. And as the sun rose on a quiet Sunday morning in her penthouse overlooking Central Park, she sat at her kitchen table, feeding her daughter a bottle, whispering stories about stars and colors and softness. Luna cooed, eyes wide and bright, fingers gripping her mother's hand like she already understood the legacy she had been born into. A legacy of resistance, of truth, of rebirth. Sophia had learned many things in the months following that infamous gala, but perhaps the most important truth was this. Women are not fragile. They bend, they break, they bleed, but they rise. Every time. She'd become a symbol, yes, a beacon, some called her. But she was more than that. She was proof. Proof that it is possible to lose everything and still create something extraordinary. That dignity doesn't come from silence. It comes from survival with grace. She never set out to inspire a movement. She just refused to disappear. Her inbox was now filled daily with messages from women across the world. I left because of you. You helped me speak out. I found my courage watching you stand still in that painting. But Sophia always replied the same way. You had it in you all along. The Laurent Foundation continued to grow, now with chapters in 5 countries. It provided legal assistance, therapy, and emergency housing for pregnant women escaping abuse. Every story added to Sophia's fuel. Not because she saw herself as a savior, but because she saw herself in them. And while Nicholas Kane faded quietly into tech obscurity, his name mentioned less and less with each financial quarter, Sophia's grew stronger. But she never chased the spotlight. She kept her focus on Luna, on healing, on building. She often walked with Luna through the exhibit halls where her paintings now hung. She'd point to inheritance and whisper, "You saved me, little one. You gave me something to protect, even when I didn't know how to protect myself." Luna would reach out with chubby hands drawn to the colors. Sophia's heart swelled every time. In an interview months later, her first and only public sit-down, a journalist asked, "If you could go back and stop the slap from happening, would you?" Sophia paused for a long moment. Then she said, "No." The interviewer blinked. "No? I wouldn't stop it?" Sophia repeated. "Because the slap wasn't the worst part. The worst part was who I had to become to survive before that night. I was disappearing for years. That moment was just the spark that lit the fire I'd been burying." She leaned in then. Sometimes pain is the most honest mirror. The clip went viral. But it wasn't the soundbite that people remembered. It was the way she looked into the camera. Fierce, free. A woman who had nothing to prove, but everything to say. That evening, the young artist from Brazil painted Sophia holding Luna under a halo of broken glass and stars. She titled it, "She Stood Anyway." It became the cover of a new feminist art anthology. Sophia didn't know. She was at home, asleep beside her daughter. The truth is, she didn't need the world's applause. She already had what mattered. She had become the woman she needed when she was breaking. The kind of woman little girls would look up to, not for being perfect, but for being real. And the story, it didn't end with revenge. It didn't end with courtrooms or awards. It ended in peace and in a promise that no woman, no matter how forgotten, how betrayed, how quiet, would ever have to stand alone again. As Luna slept that night, wrapped in a soft blanket with sunflowers embroidered on the edge, Sophia whispered into the darkness, "You will grow up knowing that your mother didn't stay down, that she stood, even when it hurt, that she built something beautiful from something brutal. Because that's what women do. They turn pain into power, silence into art, and trauma into truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real happy ending. Not the applause, not the gallery walls, but a little girl growing up never having to wonder what strength looks like. Because she will have seen it in every brushstroke, every story, every breath of the woman who brought her into the world. So the story has ended. Our wonderful friends, are you still here with me right now? If you're still watching until this very moment, then I know, somewhere deep inside, you felt something. Maybe a whisper, maybe a wave, but it touched your heart, and that matters. This story wasn't just about betrayal or revenge, it was about reclaiming yourself, even when the world tries to erase you. As the philosopher from the school of heterodoxism once said, healing is not becoming who you were before, it's about creating someone stronger with the pieces. So if you've ever been broken, or silenced, or made to feel small, please remember, your comeback can be louder than the pain. If this story moved you, like it. Share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe, and hey, drop a comment. Tell us your story. We're listening, always.